This is really interesting for me because I think if you're Mauricio Pochettino, you have to be thinking, I haven't gotten the most out of Christian Pulisic. And I think it's time to likely look at the 3-5-2. I would want to get the best out of him, and I would want to build a team around my best player. And that's without question Christian Pulisic.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Inside American Soccer. I'm your host, Tom Bogert, and as always, I'm joined by my friend and one of the greatest players in U.S. soccer history, a veteran of 3 World Cups, and a former MLS US U20 head coach, Tab Ramos. Tab, it's the holiday season. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time this is coming out. It's going to come out soon from when you're listening to this. But we are in that malaise of the between Christmas and New Year's where today could be Friday, today could be Sunday, today could be Monday. I've got no idea. Tab, how's your Christmas? How's your holiday season been?
It's been great, but you're right. It's confusing because I think I feel like I'm in between meals all the time. So I'm not sure. I know that when we're done doing this, I'm going to eat something.
I thought you were gonna say I was obviously soccer always plays a part in these times. Had my Christmas Eve kick, which was great, but then immediately you just load up on food and drinks and everything else that comes with this time. I got to play in like a men's league game last night and just desperately needed to sweat. I'm sure that you don't have that problem because I'm sure you do things in better moderation than somebody like me. So that's where I was from.
Yeah, well, you have to consider, Tom, that I'm an old man, so I have to take care of myself, and the extent of my athletic commitment at this point is just some runs in the morning, which I really enjoy, to be honest.
I bet you'd dust me in a run, and it wouldn't be close. Tab, what was the best gift you gave or received this holiday season?
I'm gonna have to go with a receive on this. Only because my youngest daughter, Sarah, gave me a pair of Nike Cortez, and those are my favorite. Everybody who's followed me along when I coached the U20s, I was always wearing the Cortez, and now I've gone away from them a little bit, and she thought of getting me a pair of those. So I was very excited about that.
That is very sweet. Yep. I love that. On my end, I'm also going to have to be selfish and go with a receive. So my wife got me a tracksuit. I love a tracksuit. I'm a guy from New Jersey, of course, Italian American from New Jersey. And we're expecting our first kid in February, and she got an identical little baby tracksuit. And now that's all I want to dress my future child in at all times.
Wow, I liked it. Did she get a little mustache for him too?
We'll see. We'll see if that comes. I'm sure that'll be natural.
Can't wait to see the baby with the mustache.
All right. Well, everybody listening to this, I hope that you're enjoying your holidays. I hope that you got some time off, some much needed family, friends, or whatever you want to do with your free time. This is the time to take it easy and enjoy the end of the year. But our Americans abroad are enjoying their time here at the end of the year. There's been a lot of players in action for the U.S. men's national team with their clubs, and we're here to break it all down. On today's show, we're going to be talking about it. Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Brenden, Aaronson, Ricardo Pepi, Patrick Agyemang. They're all doing really, really well. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for the United States as we approach the World Cup? We'll also look ahead to 2026. What do the team need to do to improve? What are we looking for going forward, as well as the latest injury updates? Tyler Adams and Chris Richards, and I'm going to have a little bit of news on Ricardo Pepi. So stay tuned for that, as well as Tab's Inside the Locker Room story. We're talking about the offseason. We're talking about a little bit of time off. Tab's going to tell us about one of the many years in which he actually had no time off. So stay tuned for that one. But let's get straight into our Americans abroad, and we got to start with Captain America Boy Wonder, Christian Pulisic. Christian Pulisic scored again for AC Milan. He is now second in Serie A in goals. He's only one behind Lautaro Martinez. He's done it in 5 less games because of the injuries, but again, he is cemented himself as one of the best players in Serie A. And he wasn't named to the Guardian's top 100 in the players in the world. That list came out around 2 weeks ago. I thought it was pretty dumb when that happened. It looks a little bit dumber now, Tab. So what do you make of Christian Pulisic's form picking up right where he left off post-injury?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on this because there's no question that Christian is having a great season for a big club under a lot of pressure week after week. And that says a lot for the form he's in. You know, it's not like we've been hiding on this show, that's for sure, because we've said, you know, Christian Pulisic is having a historic season. likely the best season that any American player has ever had, and potentially could have later into the future, because it's really amazing what he's doing. In terms of the 100, I definitely have to agree with that. How can you not put him on the top 100 list? I do know that when they do the voting, though, they ask from voters, they ask only for a top 40 list, right? So
Correct.
it gets a little bit tighter when you consider the top 40, and then you look at teams like Arsenal, and even let me just give an example, because I try to go through numbers and say, how is it possible in the world that he is not in the top 100? And then you start going team by team, and if you consider that the list, maybe it's only 40 that you turn in, and you look at teams like Arsenal, and even at Arsenal only, if you took names off, like obviously like Gabriel Jesus or Havertz or Madueke or Odegaard, and you didn't count those, you still have Edse, you have Gyökeres, you have Saka, you have Rice, right? That's just one team. And then you go to Chelsea and you look at Palmer, Estevao, you look at Fernandes, Caicedo, and then you keep going. There's a lot of players out there who are good players. Having said that, he has had a great season. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's not in the top 100 in the world. He didn't make the list, but he's certainly having an amazing season. And yeah, at this point, I would agree with you that the list looks dumb.
Just not to get, and we fully respect the Guardian, the voters, right? Like that's not a pot shot to take away from the list. We're all gonna have disagreements. That's the beauty of this game. But one thing that I've found particularly silly is like Rafa Leao made the list. Like Pulisic plays in the same team. He's just unquestionably been better for pretty much like 18 months now. But I digress on that. Pulisic is in, I think, the form of his life. It's an awesome situation. He is so integral to what Milan are doing, and they're in this Scudetto race. What's been interesting is, so they play three at the back. It's not exactly the same system as the United States, but obviously there is some overlap, particularly starting with the three at the back. So with the United States, it's more of like a 3-4-2-1. With Milan, it's been more of like a 3-5-2. So Pulisic is playing as a second forward. It's not too dissimilar from the like positional role with the national team, where he's like a 10.5, where he can drift a little bit further wide. He doesn't really have to or need to for this Milan team because of the wingbacks giving all of that support, and you're playing up top with another forward, and then box crashing runners behind you in the midfield. So Pulisic, I think, thriving in this system is unsurprising given what we've seen, or this is a good foundation or a good look into more ways I think he could even impact the national team. He has played under Greg Berhalter in a back four. He played as like a 10. It didn't quite work out. I love him in either a second forward role in a 3-5-2 or the role he's playing with the national team, or will be playing with the national team, as one of those two 10s.
This is really interesting for me because, I think if you're Mauricio Pochettino, you have to be thinking, I haven't gotten the most out of Christian Pulisic. And it was the same case before with Berhalter. I think it's time to likely look at the 3-5-2. Don't forget, with the 3-5-2, it now gives you the opportunity to have that triangle in midfield. And so if you go with that, now you have the option of having potentially Adams, Tesman, and McKennie behind Pulisic and Balogun. So, and I think if I were to look at the team now, knowing that Christian has not been the best for us at any moment over the last few years, I would want to get the best out of him, and I would want to build a team around my best player, and that's without question Christian Pulisic. And if that's the case, I would likely look into the change. But now that changes your roster, right? Because now, how much room do you have for guys like Reina and Tillman and guys that are those 10 type players that now you likely are playing without a 10? Now you're playing with three strong midfielders who can win the ball back, and with two forwards. But I think that would likely make our team better.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So I still think that you get the best traits from Pulisic with the 3-4-2-1. And I think that'll help with more support as well, because while Aronson and Dest are excellent going forward, that is what they were best at. I would like to have, like you said, that triangle. And I'd rather have, instead of all three of Adams, McKennie, and Tesman, maybe a Reina, maybe a Tillman, somebody more naturally attacking, somebody more natural for the link up. Though I think that this is a great option depending on the opponent, particularly we're going to talk about Weston McKennie next. Like, he's playing very well for Juventus, and that would suit him very, very well, because we've discussed previous episodes that maybe it's not a perfect fit if you have to be the double pivot with Tyler Adams and you have to be less energetic, or at least less roaming and less freedom in that role. But if you're playing as a third central midfielder, let's say it's Tessman and Adams, well, Tessman will hold, Adams will mostly hold, but he'll go win the ball. That frees up McKennie to always be joining the attack and playing as like an 8.5, maybe not quite a 10 because he's not a traditional 10, but I do think that that's an interesting look. And it's all about, over these next 6 months, of finding and fine-tuning and optimizing the best 11 and your best players. Pulisic, chief among them. McKennie, now let's talk about him. He's returning into that conversation of, okay, like, do we need to really consider him when building out this team and when building out the principles? So he played his 200th game for Juventus. He had another assist last week. He played right wing back in that game. He's mostly a starter. In this day and age, there are a few players like Pulisic who are going to essentially start every game at a club like Juventus. For a player like McKennie, starting most of the games is where it's at, because it's a big squad. There's a lot of options. McKennie's been very, very good for Juventus. Really quickly, there was a rumor out there that, you know, he had agreed to a new contract, but it fell apart at the last minute. That's just not true. From what sources told me, is that Juventus hadn't even really approached McKennie about a new contract. And very interesting with his contract up in the summer, I would assume that they're going to try to make a deal, given how important he's been to the team. But you never know, because every year they seem to overlook him and his value within the team. But Weston McKennie is back to playing really, really good, really consistent soccer, even if he's jumping around position by position wherever they need him.
Yeah, and you know, going into the summer, I think if Juventus are not making a move over the next month to re-sign him, it's not like he's going to not have options. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of teams interested in McKennie. He has a lot to offer. I think the only drawback at this point, and by the way, playing 200 games at Juventus is not nothing. Let's just start with that, right? That shows consistency, you know, playing for a club that's under pressure every week. You know, he's right there, you know, ready to be criticized every week, and he shows up and plays well almost every week. I think the only drawback is, obviously, he's not playing in the position that he would potentially, and I say drawback in terms of our national team, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we care about. He's not playing that position where he would play for the national team. His touches are limited to being somewhere in the 40s every week, rather than you'd want to be in a position to having 60 to 80 touches on the ball and being involved a little bit more in the game, which doesn't seem like a lot. But when you go from 40 touches to 65 or 70, you're looking at a pretty big increase of like 60% more involvement in the game. And so he's having less than that, which is not great. But he's, you know what, at the end of the day, it's important to be on the field. It's important to compete, and he's doing that well, and he's performing every week. And he's one of the most consistent players Juventus has had for the last couple of years. So you have to say we have to be happy with that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the manager is. Doesn't matter what the system is. It doesn't matter if they try to say you're going to train with the U21s, or they tell his camp in preseason, hey, he's not in the plans. Every year he fights and earns the spot, and what a great quality that is. In terms of the positional stuff, right, we've hashed over this plenty. It's not just the touches, and that's a really good point to even quantify it like that. It's where the touches are. It's the quality. It's what is the responsibility of where you are. In the midfield, it's obviously, or in central midfield, it's 360 scanning. It's progressing the ball, whether that's dribbling or passing. When you're wing back, it's more about a lot of straight line running and finding the intelligence of when you're going to kind of cut in, or when you're going to crash the back post, or when you need to hold and all that stuff. So it is completely different responsibilities, but I would love to see him playing more in central midfield, but I don't see that happening on a consistent basis for Juventus. Hopefully he'll get enough time there, and then we'll revisit this in March. Hopefully he gets a good run in central midfield. So, because that, I think, is one of the bigger questions of, is he a locked-in starter? Does this make sense? Is he somebody that makes sense next to Tyler Adams in this system? Or if Tyler Adams is not ready to go in March, what would he look like next to Tanner Tessman, Johnny Cardoso, whoever it may be? What are the tweaks, and what are the best ways to get the most out of, again, a really, really good player.
Yeah, and you know, when you put it that way and you try to figure out, okay, what's the best partnerships? You know, as I thought about the 3-5-2 earlier today about how we would put that together, what I really like about McKennie and the 3-5-2 being that third midfielder with potentially Adams and Tessman behind him is the fact that he gets into the box really well. I mean, he does make those runs that end inside the 6-yard box, and that's not easy to get those number 8s that make those runs. And I think if he were to be that support to Pulisic and to Balogun as being the third runner into the box, I think he could do really well with that.
I totally agree. Another player who is doing very well and somebody that we hope to see more with the national team in 2026 is Ricardo Pepi. So he scored 5 goals over the last month, 4 in the league, 1 in the Champions League. He scored in all of those appearances. The only game that he hasn't scored over the last month was a cup game that they won 3-0. Ricardo Pepi is somebody who is admired in the Premier League. It's long been that. When he was leaving Augsburg, there was interest in the Premier League. He ends up going to PSV. I think that was a really, really smart move for his career. Sources have told me that Fulham have made a bid to PSV, around 30 million euros. That has been rejected. Sources also expect that Fulham are going to come back with another bid for Ricardo Pepi. They're not the only team that's interested in him in January. He's somebody that could be on the move, and PSV are a club that if you give the right price, they will sell. They will not hold the player back, even though he is very important to this team. So, Tab, your outlook in January for Ricardo Pepi, we spoke about the possibility of him moving on our January transfer window special episode. And now it's even more real, I think, than we knew of a couple weeks ago. So what would you make of a potential move to Fulham to the Premier League if it does indeed come to pass?
Well, first of all, I'll start by saying that I'm really rooting for him, right? Because of the last World Cup and him not having the opportunity. And I think he deserved it then. And I think, you know, he's working hard enough after coming back from the injury to deserve it now. Obviously, he's playing well. I think a 30 million offer is a fair offer. I don't think the price will go much more than that. And hopefully he and his agent can push this move, because him moving to the Premier League will definitely put him in position, certainly to make the U.S. roster. But I think more than that, it would put him in position to fight for a starting position if he does well there.
Yeah, for sure. Going to the biggest stage in the world. Fulham has Raul Jimenez, the Mexico international center forward, on their books, but they are in the market to add to those options in the attack, which would be another interesting wrinkle, Mexico versus U.S. But Ricardo Pepi, I think that there's no question that he's got the talent, got the form, mentality, all of that to go to the Premier League. That doesn't always mean it's going to be perfect. It's always going to work out, but he's a guy that I'd bet on. And again, the worst case scenario, even if something wouldn't work out, there's going to be plenty of other teams interested in him. I do think that Fulham would be a good fit for him. I think he makes sense within that team, within that roster, and that coach. It'd be financially, I'm assuming, very, very positive for him going from the Dutch league to the Premier League. It's just a fact of where things are, and it is higher competition. And I think it's just all positives if this deal is able to get done.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. I think he would, you know, he's been at PSV for a while now. I think he probably can use, sort of changing the roster, changing the competition, being in a more competitive league week to week, fighting for a position once again. And at Fulham, he's going into a club that's not fighting for relegation. You know, they're not against the ropes every week. It's a team that consistently has found its way in the Premier League over the last few years and has been consistently in the league. So it would be a good situation for him to jump into.
2 more players who have been performing well over this festive period. First, Brenden Aaronson. He was man of the match for Leeds. He's got 3 assists in his last 7 games, and Leeds are now unbeaten in their last 5 matches, which is no small feat for a team that just got promoted back to the top flight. He's a player that has drawn a lot of criticism from Leeds fans, particularly when he first signed, because it was an expensive signing. It was, $30 million or something to that effect. And he was billed as a number 10. And when you don't know who the player is that's coming in and you hear a $30 million number 10, you're thinking chance creation. You're thinking a Gio Reyna type profile or Malik Tillman, somebody like that. Brenden Aaronson is not that. Brenden Aaronson has a lot of strengths, and I think he makes a ton of sense for Leeds. I thought so when he was first signed. Marcelo Bielsa really, really wanted him. That was the driver. That was before Jesse Marsch took charge. And he stayed and fought for his place in this team. He could have left, and he didn't. And I think that he's enjoying the fruits of that labor, particularly this year with Leeds. I think it's a positive story. That kid's mentality is Teflon, and his work rate, all of the things that coaches love, he's got it. And whether or not he's scoring or creating a billion chances, I think is more of a bonus for him. And what he's done over the last month or so with Leeds, he hasn't been starting every single game, but getting man of the match, getting a few assists, getting more of those goal contributions has been very important for him.
Yeah, it's hard to think of any other player besides Christian Pulisic who has had more of an effect on their own team than Aronson. I mean, and you're right, he does get criticized week to week, but I tell you what, I don't know that there's another American leaving everything on the field week after week like he does. And that's a trait that you want to have on every team. And I think because of that, I mean, Mauricio Pochettino has to be thinking, how do I make the best use out of this player? Because at the end of the day, he is not the number 10 that most people think about. He is the number. He's a number 10 that will pressure the ball, that will fight defensively. He's a smart player. He gets into good defensive shape. He gets into the right spots. He wins the ball back. He works. There's sometimes there's different ways of describing players, and one of them that I remember Jurgen Klinsmann always talking about was that you can be a giver or a taker, and he's definitely a giver. So Aronson is a giver to the team. He does everything for the team, and I think that's a great quality to have. I think that's one that we can't pass on. The question becomes, how do you fit him into what we're doing? Right, because he is inevitably that's what's going to happen. Whether you're in a 3-5-2 or in a 3-4-2-1, you have to fit him into one of those positions, and inevitably, it's either going to be a position from which you're going to need a lot of creation, like Tillman can provide or Reyna can provide, or if you're going to need that defensive role, it's likely going to be a little bit further back, like Tyler Adams can or like McKennie can. And so it's a very difficult spot to be in if you're the coach in terms of, I have to fit him in, and how do I do this?
So for me, he's not a perfect fit, I don't think, at a few of these spots, but Jim Curtin was his first coach, the Philadelphia Union, and he speaks glowingly of Brenden Aronson. And one thing that he said has always stuck with me. He goes, Brendan's a guy that, as a coach, you just can't take off the field. And that was true in Philly. They had their highest paid player played his position when he was an academy graduate trying to get his feet in the first team. He put him on the bench, and he was playing all of the time because of that quality. Same thing happened at Salzburg. Immediately, he becomes a key player. At Leeds, even when things aren't, like even when he doesn't have the goals or the assists, he's playing a lot because he does so many good things well. I frame that back to the national team, and I just think that you find a spot for him on the roster. And I don't think that he's a starter within this group, but I think that he's going to be a valuable squad member. So that's Brenden Aronson. It's always good to see him playing well. One more. Patrick Agyemang, he scored again for Derby County. He's got 3 goals in his last 4 games. He is the unquestioned starter, despite missing some time when he made the move from Charlotte FC in the summer. I believe he had a hernia injury, and he immediately, when he returned, got in the starting lineup. That is not easy for a new signing. That is not easy for a player who had not been to England before, who was playing D3 soccer as recently as 2019, fights his way into the Charlotte team, and then gets to Derby, doesn't have a preseason because of that injury, and is immediately starting. And he's been a handful. I think that physical profile is something that nobody else within this pool at that position can match. And that's always going to put him on the radar for Mauricio Pochettino and that World Cup squad.
Well, I think you framed it really well. I have been one of the ones that has not been on this bandwagon over the last couple of years. I thought he was always very one-dimensional. I always think that his best comes out of that curling run to the left side of the field, that diagonal run into the left side. I think you need a lot more. But at the same time, maybe, when you see the type of goal he scored, a couple days ago, and he overpowers everybody in the championship, you're thinking, well, maybe we need a little bit of that, because you tend to sometimes select the same type of players because that's what you want for your team. But sometimes you need something completely different. And I think that's why you framed it perfectly. I think there may be a time where you're looking down the bench and you're thinking, at this time, we're going to be serving some balls into the box because we need a goal in the end. And maybe he's not one of the best three forwards that we have at the moment, but maybe he's the one that I would go to on the bench in those moments. And because of that, I think he's going to have a chance to make this team all the way to the end.
I think so too, and I think those final roster spots, particularly at center forward, we're going to discuss a whole lot between now and the World Cup. But it's time for a quick break. We'll be right back as we look ahead to 2026. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Inside American Soccer with Tom Bogert and Sal Ramos. Wherever you get your podcast, please do, particularly rating it. That's how other people find the show. We would very much appreciate that. So time for a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Inside American Soccer. So a few weeks ago, we looked back at 2025. We gave out our best and worst for the national team and everything in between. And now, right before New Year's, we're going to look ahead to 2026, the World Cup year. So as always, we're going to focus everything we talk about around the World Cup. So looking ahead to that tournament, what is one thing, Tab, that you want to see over the next 6 months that will help set up the United States to succeed at the 2026 World Cup?
For me, what I'd like to see is for us to start working on our starting 11 and watch our starting 11 play. I'd like to see sort of the same team playing game after game and building towards the World Cup. We're going to have some great matches between now and June. And I think we're going to take some hits because of the quality of the European teams that we're playing. But I would like to see for us to start to project what the World Cup is going to be like by seeing our best 11 players playing together.
So my answer is similar, in a similar vein to that, because it's just health, right? It's making sure Pulisic is 100%, no more nagging injuries. Tyler Adams to recover from his torn MCL. Chris Richards, I think those three more than anybody else. But Balogun, you talk about Pepi, Tillman, Gio Reyna, of course. When you talk about injuries, I'm hoping for something that you can't really control. You can do your best to try to mitigate, but for me, it is a lot about health, and I think that works in tandem, Tab, with what you're saying. And if the most key players are always available or mostly available, you can start building continuity within that system, within that lineup, within those partnerships, within the game, because the mentality was an issue over the summer. They've completely fixed that for me. I think that Pochettino and the staff deserve a ton of credit. That's something that they've been working on really hard and really trying to instill as a priority. I think that was fixed. Tactical, that was a big problem, I thought, in the summer. Well, that's been fixed with the new system. It can always be fine-tuned, but generally things are in the right direction. It's about health for me and the best players being available.
Yeah, without question. There come moments in a game, and this happens, and I would imagine it happens in all sports where, you get to that moment in the game where you're giving your max and the other team's giving your max, and it's those small details that are going to make the difference. And I think this is why I'd like for us to have our 11, because at those moments when you're used to playing together, you can react in a certain way because your teammate, that you can count on your teammate to react in a certain way. So I'd like to see our 11 together so that we can build on that. We can build on being able to figure out those difficult moments in the game where the game can tip one way or the other.
I was speaking to a current national team player who, this isn't like a new idea or anything, but just kind of emphasizing how it's like, dude, it's difficult, particularly at first when you get back with the national team, because when I'm playing with my club team, everything is so orchestrated and drilled and trained that I could play with a blindfold on, and I know when I receive the ball in this pocket that I'm going to have an option to my right to flick, or I'm going to take a touch and play it to the left. With the national team, it's more difficult because you don't have that time on the training. You don't have that many games. Things can't be quite as drilled and choreographed. You can have principles and everything, but then changing your brain on, okay, like I'm not playing for my club team, I'm playing for the national team. What are the duties, responsibilities, and roles? So having as many minutes as possible to build that and to continue to reinforce those times where you can turn your brain off and know I can flick it around the corner. I don't need to look. I know that the winger's going to be there. Or, hey, if I'm a center back and I want to play a long ball, I know where the winger's going to be, or I know where the wing back's going to be. Something to that effect where, at clubs in this day and age, that stuff is second nature, right? You don't have to think. You can just you don't even need to react. You just kind of play because you know where everybody's supposed to be at all times.
Yeah, and I would go, here's a good example, playing with Serginho Dest or playing without Serginho Dest, right? If you're one of the midfielders, Serginho, for example, is very unpredictable, right? So most of the time he doesn't know what he's going to do next. So, and this is not a bad thing, right? But at the same time, as it's a good thing for your team because he can be unpredictable in attack, he can also be unpredictable defensively. And because of that, you have to make up for that. And if you're not used to doing that week after week, you have that disadvantage. Now, I will say this. Other national teams have the same issues that we have. They don't play together either, right? But you want to have many of the details already prepared going into the summer. That's why I'd like for us to take advantage of that.
I agree, but also they did have World Cup qualifying, so they did have a lot of games of consequence, which is just straight up different than friendlies. And also, I haven't run any data here, but I'd be hard-pressed to find another national team that has called up 71 people in a calendar year. So I think it's a little bit more difficult on our end. Another one, what is your biggest reason for optimism for the World Cup?
Well, I think just having watched the last 4 games, in particular 3 out of those 4 games, and the mentality that we had, because at the end of the day, this summer is not going to be all about tactics. It's going to be mostly about mentality. The team is going to be under a lot of pressure, but at the same time, the team is going to be supported by millions and millions of people. I think, people will be excited about this team, and because of that, that'll bring that pressure. But I think the mentality is going to be tremendously important. And for the first time in years, we were able to see it in the last 2 windows. And I think that gives me a lot of hope for what this team can do.
Oh, exactly. It all comes down to the last, 4 or 5 games in the fall when things really were not looking good prior to that. So I think that's tangible optimism. Those are things that we can point to and look at rather than talking about things in the abstract and like, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? Like, I think that was very important for the morale of both the group, but more so the fan base, more so how quickly the crowd is going to be worrying or how quickly things can turn and even the mentality within the group. I think that's all strong. But to give a different answer as well, like I look at these tournaments and maybe it's a little naive or maybe it's a little bit reductive, but when your best players are your best players, you get success. And I think about, again, your era, guy like you, I think about the 2010s, the Landon Donovan, Clint Dempsey, Michael Bradley, like when those dudes were playing at the top of their games, you felt like we could beat anybody, right? Tim Howard against Belgium, like feel like you could beat anybody. So I look at Pulisic, and he's in the form of his life. I look at Chris Richards, he's in the form of his life. Tyler Adams was before he got injured, and if those 3 guys are firing, and I use the same 3 names over and over again, so apologies for being redundant as well, but man, like as long as the baseline level for the rest of the team is there, and it has been in the fall, then you have a chance to let your special players be special.
And you have other guys in their best form, because you're looking at McKennie, and we're talking exactly about that, right? We're talking about Aronson, and he's in his best form. Pepi is getting to his best form. Balogun is in his best form for our national team. So you have a lot of guys, you have a lot of it sort of coming together, and we hope that we can keep that 6 months from now, we're talking about this same exact thing.
I hope so too. One more here. I know that there's been a ton of players called up, and I'm not sure that anybody quite qualifies as off the radar, but is there a player that maybe isn't quite in focus that has a chance to break out over the first 6 months of this year and be considered for the World Cup roster?
Unfortunately, I'd have to say no because, after calling so many players, I don't know that anyone's off the radar. Well, normally what you do in these cases is you look at your youth national teams, right? So you look, at this point, we'd be looking at like a Brooklyn Reigns, or you're looking at a Kermaski, or you're looking at a Sakiris. You're looking at guys who were successful in the younger teams. But I think they're pretty far away at this point from breaking into this team. And by the way, it doesn't mean that they couldn't do it, but I just don't think it's realistic where we are.
I agree with you there, and I did this exercise as well, like going through like the U20 World Cup squad, and again, I think that there's players that project well for the future, but I do think 26 is too soon. In terms of off the radar, I think Brian White would count as off the radar, or at least more so than some of the others, and I just think that Any center forward that gets hot has the chance to make a World Cup squad. Edson Buttle, Hercules Gomez, or two in recent memory. Heck, even Haji Wright, like he kind of came out of nowhere before 22. Jesus Ferreira was within the team, and that was a little bit of a controversial selection, and he started some of those games. But those are kind of the profiles that I think have the quickest chance to play your way onto the roster if you score a bunch of goals over a few months leading into the World Cup. And then maybe one more, like Tristan Blackman. Again, I know that this is a player who was just with the team in September, but MLS Defender of the Year, particularly if as the back three persists. Cameron Carter-Vickers has gotten injured. That was an option in that position that maybe he's somebody who could play his way onto that last center back spot. But, I'd probably still stick with Brian White ahead of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Jersey connection with Brian White, I think that makes sense altogether, all around as being an option, right? But I would say Tristan Blackman, I think he's likely, one injury away, from someone else getting injured, from being in the real picture here. And I've said this before in other shows, I like the way he plays. I think he has a lot to offer, and I think he could offer a lot to this national team. So, I think that's a good call.
All right, with that, we're going to take one more quick break, and we'll be back with another Tab Ramos story inside the locker room, as well as inside the notebook. I'll give you some information that I've got coming lately around the national team. Thanks for listening. As always, Inside American Soccer, please rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. We are going to go inside the locker room with Tab Ramos once again. Tab, we are in the period where, again, hopefully if you're listening to this, you've gotten some time off, and if you don't, thanks for listening, and I hope that you'll have some time off soon. But when we're talking about time offs, professional athletes have a little bit of an off season. It gets less and less, it seems like, every year. But Tab, back in the 90s, there was a long period where between the national team and a couple transfers you made, you didn't have any time off. So bring us back to that time and what it's like as a professional athlete without any type of break.
Well, let me connect it a little bit to what happens now, right? Because we're very much a world now that focuses on work, on load and player and management of that load, right? You even see it in the NBA. You see it in other sports where load management has become really important. Back then, obviously, we weren't thinking so much about that. First of all, I'll be out there and saying that I don't think more than a couple weeks rest is needed. You don't want to be away from the game for that long because it takes you longer to come back. But in particular, one summer when I transferred from Betis to Tigres, knowing that I was going into the MLS the following year, I went to Tigres, played the half season at Tigres from January until the summer. And in the summer, we had Copa America. We had some national team friendlies, but on top of that, we had Copa America. And Copa America was in Uruguay, which is, a 12, 14-hour flight south. And by the way, it's in the winter because you're going into the southern hemisphere, so you're going to competing in the winter. And we went to Copa America, and as many people know, we did pretty well at Copa America. Beat Argentina 3-0, took first place in our group, knocked Argentina to second place, forced Argentina to go play Brazil right away, and we played Mexico and advanced all the way to the semifinals of that Copa America. And because of it, we stayed all the way to the end. We played the third place game, which meant we were at Copa America from beginning to end, so it was long. And then after that, I had to go to preseason with Tigres because the preseason was starting. So had played now the season at Tigres, some friendlies with the national team, the full Copa America, and now I go to preseason, which I feel like I don't need because I've been playing all along. We had been playing the whole time. But you go into preseason anyway, and to top it off, the preseason at Tigres, we were doing it half in Italy and half in Greece. So I flew from Uruguay to Mexico to start the preseason. We were there for a few days, and then we flew to Italy, which, by the way, in Italy we played against Perugia, but the second game we played was against Padova, and Alexi Lalas was on that team. So I got to play against Alexi Lalas in Italy with Tigres against Padova, which is kind of neat. Two Americans playing each other, and especially at that time. Right now, it's not a big deal, but back then it was a big deal having two Americans play each other in Europe in a preseason game. But anyway, and from there we went to Greece, played in a tournament there with Estudiantes from Argentina and Olympiacos, and then we went back to Mexico a couple weeks later, and then started our season that went all the way to December. But then the issue was from December. Then we started the second half of the season in Mexico, and then I had to roll right into MLS. So MLS was starting in April of that year.
Mm-hmm.
So I rolled right into MLS, and I was going into a league that hadn't existed. That was its first year. So it was really more about the lack of planning, because there's no other way to say, from going from January of one year to December of the following year, playing sort of the whole time nonstop, which was really difficult.
Did you stay fit throughout that whole time, or did you have any I guess abnormal minor injuries or anything like that?
I'm sure I had a couple injuries at least at the time, because I was getting injured from time to time. I was at that time, I think that's the year when I turned 30. And because of that, I was already starting to wear down a little bit. Back then, without the VAR, guys like me used to get jacked up all the time in games. So it was not easy to stay on the field all the time. So I'm sure I had a couple injuries that year. Yeah.
What was that like mentally for you?
I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy having time off. I like playing week to week because I felt like I stayed sharp that way. And the focus was not so much on training. The focus was more in games. When you get injured, or when, you have time off, you have to focus on training because your fitness becomes a big part of what you're doing. But when you're playing week to week, all training does is just sharpen you up for the weekend, and you like being in that environment of week to week, just being focused on the games.
When you're again, off is a relative term, because it's not as if you're sitting on the couch for 24 hours a day. But would you dabble in playing other sports with friends and stuff? What was it like when you did have a few weeks off where you didn't have to go to, let's say, a 2-a-day training session?
Yeah, well, being off a couple of weeks for me meant playing tennis, basketball, every other sport every day. So I really, I always played all sports, so I really enjoy that.
I can see you being really good at tennis, but I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit dubious of your basketball skills. What were you any good at basketball?
No, I mean, it depends on how you define that. No, but I'll tell you this. Like, for example, in college at N.C.State, we had an intramural basketball team, and we won, it twice with like 100 teams in the tournament. It was basically all soccer players and a couple swimmers, because they were tall. And we won the intramural league a couple years in a row. So
listen, I take it back. I was wrong. I take it back. I was wrong.
And don't forget, I went to school at Benedict's, where like getting in the gym and hitting a few shots is important too. And by the way, I took Tony Miola a couple times to St. Benedict's to play with me, because Tony is a great basketball player.
I can see that.
So basketball is a sport I actually enjoyed a lot. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I love watching. I'm a huge Knicks fan. I love watching basketball.
Yeah.
I am useless on a basketball court.
Okay.
I'll tell you that much. My extent of basketball is playing futsal, and I'm sure that's likely the case for many soccer players, but not you. I was wrong there.
Yeah.
I doubted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I can't let that happen again. In terms of, now we're talking about off season, and in MLS it is the off season, and there have been several players within the national team that a guy like Alex Freeman, he hasn't played since late October, early November. Jack McGlynn even before that. Diego Luna, October. Some of the players within the national team, I'm certain that they've been training. They've been staying fit, doing the best that they can. Preseason reconvenes in a couple weeks around MLS, and then the first games are in mid-February. How difficult is it for those MLS players to lock back in to the start of the season, be at your best, to be able to be in consideration to be called up, and then be at your best if they are at the March camp?
Well, I mean, players have to be doing their homework, because they're off for a couple months. It doesn't mean that they're not playing. I mean, if anything, hopefully, like they should be finding their way to somewhere like Florida, where a lot of them get together and do their own mini camp, and they play a little bit. I know that, in our time, whenever we had time, we would do that. And I know from being at Houston Dynamo that some of the players did get together, in the off season, somewhere warm where a bunch of them come together and they help each other out. They work out together. They play some games. They do some small sided things, but you're still involved in the game. So hopefully the players can do that and are doing that. If not, if they can't do that, they can always come here and play for the Brooklyn Italians. I can hook them up. I can hook them up with the Brooklyn Italians, and they can come play here, the indoor league.
I think that's a great call. I think that'd be pretty good for a few of them. That was Inside the Locker Room. Now we're going to go inside the notebook and talk about some of the biggest stories around the national team. The biggest one, I think, was already the Ricardo Pepi transfer info that we gave you in the first segment. But let's start with some injury news. Chris Richards, he left on a stretcher for Crystal Palace, and then he missed the team's next game. That was the first Premier League game that he missed, showing his importance to this very, very good Crystal Palace side. The good news is, despite being stretchered off, it's a short-term injury. He got stitches on his foot, and he's questionable to play in the team's New Year's Day match. That is best-case scenario, because you hear stretcher and somebody being carried off, you don't think just stitches. So thankfully, the worst-case scenario was avoided. Chris Richards, whether he's back on New Year's Day or not, I think is immaterial because it won't be long before he returns to the lineup, and that is crucial for the national team.
No question. And he's a tough player. He hasn't missed any games. I don't think he won't skip a beat here with this. I recall a situation with the under-20s. We were playing Ukraine, and I remember Chris Richards, we came in the locker room at halftime, and he pulled his socks down, took his shin guard off, and underneath he had a cut, some kind of cut. He had been kicked, and he was looking at it, and I'm like, "What are you looking at?" I said, and he goes, "Yeah, he's like, nothing, coach." Put the thing back on and went right back without a problem. I think he's a tough player. He's shown it. He wouldn't be in the league where he is if he wasn't, and I think he won't skip a beat. So we got nothing to worry about there.
I agree. So disaster avoided there. The next piece of injury news, Tyler Adams, he is out for around 2 to 3 months with a torn MCL. So that puts in doubt if he's going to be able to play in March. It's not good news, but again, it avoids the worst case scenario because going down with a knee injury early in a game, you never know exactly what it is. And if that was an ACL, that's it for the World Cup, which would be an absolute disaster. Again, torn MCL is not a positive thing, but it's something that he'll be able to recover from and be back to full fitness and form. That is the prognosis ahead of the World Cup. And again, maybe he'll be here in March with the team, but again, this isn't nearly as positive as the Chris Richards situation, but content with it to not be the worst case scenario for Tyler Adams.
In this one, I feel a little bit different. I'm worried about this one because although it's an MCL, if the MCL is on the inside of your knee, and because of it, you use it constantly for your inside of the foot passing. You use it for blocking shots. You use it for winning tackles. It's very difficult to get your confidence back when you do an MCL. It takes a while. So just because he may be recovered, let's say in 2 months, it may take him another month or two for him to be fully confident that he can go hard with the inside of his foot. It's a much more difficult injury than let's say the doctors could say, because it requires your confidence, requires for your brain to be fully confident that you can make that hard tackle and you can hit that ball hard. So I'm a little bit worried about this. I don't see him playing in March. Hopefully he does. But I think he should be okay for the World Cup, obviously.
Yeah, and at least there should be that time, again, depending on exactly when he comes back, there should be that time to gain that confidence mentally more than physically. Because, again, let's say he comes back mid-March, late March, like you still have, 10-ish games left in the Premier League schedule, depending on, again, exactly when he comes back. So at least he will have some time there. But, Tab, to your point about being worried, it really leaves no room for setbacks, no rooms for, another little injury because just running out of game time. There will be the pre-World Cup friendlies, the two at the end of May. But at that point, you hope that he's completely fully firing. And again, I'll be optimistic and hope that he is. But now we are at a point where there is no room for setbacks or error. But if I could add to that, as you're saying, there's no room for setbacks. This is the type of injury where you have setbacks,
because all it takes is for you to block a shot where the ball sort of hits your toe and opens your leg a little bit more for you to be set back for a week or two. And that's the tough part, and that's what worries me most.
It's a good point and good insight. Lastly here, Luca de la Torre, per sources, is signing for Charlotte FC. He left San Diego after a 1-year loan from Celta Vigo. I'm told that this is a permanent deal to Charlotte. He fell out of the San Diego starting lineup by the playoffs. I think in Charlotte, he provides something that they really need. They don't have ball progressors and creative technical types in the midfield. But the only worry here for Luca de la Torre is a prerequisite to getting on the field for Dean Smith in Charlotte is defensive tenacity and work rate. And we've seen some other technical midfielders that either get pushed to play on the as a winger, Pepi, or just kind of get dropped entirely from the team, which was Eric Williamson. Luca de la Torre is a better player than Eric Williamson, but that is the only worry, that if he doesn't play sharp and intense on the defensive side, Dean Smith is a guy that will go for a more kind of industrial type of midfielder. But he's the player. He's a player that Charlotte really need, and I think this will be a good fit.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on this, because I think Luca is not a great fit for this team. I'm actually surprised with this signing into Charlotte. I could see Luca doing much better in a place like Houston, or so. And by the way, I have to say this because obviously I have a little bit of insight on some of these players. I don't think Luca de la Torre's heart rate has gone above 60 for the last 10 years. He is as cool. He's as cool a player as I've ever seen. Nothing gets to him. He will go to Charlotte. He will make a great effort. He will do the best he can, and he won't sweat it because he has confidence in his ability. He has great technical ability to get out of any situation, but I just don't think, for some of the reasons that you mentioned, I just don't think he's a great fit for that team. But obviously, that's just my opinion. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. And I think that is a fair worry. Charlotte need to evolve, like Dean Smith needs to evolve his game model, and he has to make sacrifices, which probably be the wrong word, but he wants a lot of dogs in the team. He wants a lot of ball winners, a lot of all of that. They did not progress in the playoffs because their midfield three were three players who give you nothing in the attacking third. And I liked each individual player, but I was at the game that they got eliminated. I cannot tell you how many times they had good passing sequences that ended at the feet of two holding midfielders that were playing more advanced because that's all they had and that's all Dean Smith trusted at that point. So maybe if he's able to bend on some of those things, Luca will be a good fit. But Tab, I think that you have every right to kind of worry on that front. Lastly, we already talked about this. Over the next week or so, I would definitely keep a tight eye on Ricardo Pepi, Fulham, or elsewhere. Again, I'm told that there is more teams interested, but Fulham are the first to table a bid. So Ricardo Pepi's future is going to be one to watch, and it looks like Fulham is trying to wrap this up as quickly as they can. So over the next week or so, definitely stay tuned to see what happens next with him.
Yeah, and it's exciting. It's exciting because I can't wait for something to happen for him. I think he's got a lot more in the tank than we've seen. Pepi has been helping our national team getting big goals for years. I still go back to the goal he scored against Honduras, when it looked like we were going to be in a tough situation trying to qualify for the World Cup. He scored a second half goal in Honduras that I'll never forget because it was that big a goal. And I think him not, being part of the last World Cup, I think he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's got a lot to prove, and I think he will make this one. And I think a move at this time will be tremendous for him and cutting that sort of that lead into the next World Cup.
I agree, and we'll stay tuned, and we're going to keep you updated on all of that. So please, thank you for listening to Inside American Soccer. Please rate, review, subscribe. Also, submit your questions for me and Tab on our YouTube video and social media posts. I will put out something on social media as well for a call to action on a mailbag episode. We're going to do that soon, but we want your questions. We want to answer whatever you want us to talk about. So thank you all for listening. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Tab, best to you. I'll see you in 2026.